It was just after sunrise in Montecito when Prince Harry's world tilted on its axis once again. The California sky, usually a comforting canvas of soft oranges and blues, felt muted that morning, as if nature itself sensed the storm brewing inside the Duke of Sussex's home. Harry stood motionless in his kitchen, the iPhone in his hand glowing with a notification he never expected to see. His face, usually composed even in the face of tabloid chaos, was now a mask of shock and anger. Meghan, barefoot and still wearing her silk robe, hovered nearby, her lips slightly parted as she tried to read the words over his shoulder. King Charles had made his move. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. An official palace statement, short and cold, declared that Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana would no longer be recognized as Prince and Princess of the United Kingdom. It was a decision that would shake the monarchy to its core, but for Harry, it felt like the final betrayal in a long line of heartbreaks. The message, carefully crafted in the sterile language of royal protocol, left no room for hope or ambiguity. His children, his pride, and his legacy were being erased from the institution that had once defined his entire existence. For Harry, this wasn't just about titles. It wasn't about protocol or tradition. It was about his children being punished for choices he made as a father trying to protect them. Choices that had already cost him his family, his military honors, and his place in the royal hierarchy. Now, it seemed, even Archie and Lilibet were not safe from the fallout. Why would he do this to them? Harry's voice cracked as he slammed the phone on the marble counter, the screen cracking beneath his hand. Meghan flinched but said nothing, her eyes glassy as she watched her husband pace the kitchen like a caged animal. But deep down, she knew. They had always known this day might come. Ever since stepping back from royal duties and moving to America, the Sussexes had tried to create a new life, far from the toxic press and suffocating traditions of the palace. But no matter how far they ran, the shadow of the monarchy seemed to follow them, a constant reminder that they could never truly escape. And now this. Harry's mind raced as he recalled the countless phone calls, emails, and strained conversations over the years, each one laced with promises that his children would remain protected, no matter where they lived. He remembered Charles's words after Lilibet's birth. Of course they'll have their titles, Harry. They're my grandchildren. That won't change. But everything had changed. In that moment, Harry felt the weight of history pressing down on him. The ghosts of the past, the mistakes of the present, and the fear for his children's future. He knew he had two choices. Accept this latest humiliation in silence or fight back in a way that would make the palace regret ever underestimating him. The fury that bubbled inside him left little room for doubt. Enough is enough, he muttered under his breath, his fists clenching as he stared out the kitchen window at the manicured garden beyond. They want war? Fine. I'll give them war. It wasn't the first time Harry had felt this way. Years earlier, when Meghan was pregnant with Archie, he'd fought tooth and nail for their son's security. Back then, the argument was about protection officers, funding, and whether Archie would be given the HRH status that automatically came with being a royal child. The palace had argued that as the son of a non-working royal, Archie didn't require the same level of protection as his cousins. But Harry had seen it differently. He knew how the press worked. He knew the threats that came with fame and privilege. He had watched his mother, Diana, navigate a world where her every move was scrutinized, her every mistake magnified, and her every success twisted into scandal. And he had watched her die because the institution that was supposed to protect her had failed. Harry swore to himself that he would never let history repeat itself. But now, with this decision, it felt as though the palace was dragging his children into the very same web of control and cruelty he had fought so hard to escape. They're just children, Harry said aloud, his voice breaking. Why can't they leave them alone? In Buckingham Palace, thousands of miles away, the atmosphere was markedly different. For King Charles, this decision was not made lightly. Surrounded by advisors and courtiers, he had agonized over the matter for months. To him, stripping Archie and Lilibet of their titles was a necessary step in modernizing the monarchy, slimming it down to include only working royals who actively supported the crown. But behind the polished language of efficiency and modernization lurked another reality. The Sussexes had become a problem the palace didn't know how to handle. From their explosive Oprah interview to their lucrative Netflix deals and Harry's tell-all memoir, Spare, the couple had aired the family's dirty laundry in ways that had left the monarchy reeling. To some insiders, Charles's decision wasn't about punishing children. It was about drawing a line in the sand. They made their choice, one senior aide reportedly told the press. You can't live in California and criticize the institution while expecting to keep all the privileges that come with it. But Harry didn't see it that way. As the hours ticked by in Montecito, Harry grew more agitated. He began pacing the living room, muttering under his breath, while Meghan sat silently on the couch, her laptop open as she scanned news headlines. The British tabloids were already spinning the story. King Charles finally acts. Archie and Lilibet removed from royal titles. Harry could feel his pulse pounding in his temples. He had tried playing nice. He had tried to reason with his father, to appeal to his better nature. But every olive branch had been met with silence or, worse, betrayal. Now he was done playing games. There are things they don't want the world to hear, Harry said, his voice low and dangerous. If they're going to punish my children, then maybe it's time the truth comes out. What are you talking about? Meghan asked cautiously, though deep down, she already knew. The recordings, Harry replied, locking eyes with her. It's time. In the days ahead, the world would be gripped by the fallout from King Charles's unprecedented decision and Harry's shocking threat. The battle lines had been drawn, and neither side seemed willing to back down. For the first time in years, Harry felt the same fire in his veins that had driven him to leave the UK. But this time, the stakes were even higher. This time, he wasn't fighting for himself or Meghan. This time, he was fighting for his children. And he wasn't going to lose. The official statement from Buckingham Palace was barely a few paragraphs long, but its impact reverberated around the world like a thunderclap. Released just after noon London time, the announcement was delivered in the signature style of the monarchy, polite, measured, and utterly devastating. In keeping with His Majesty's vision for a modernized monarchy and following careful consideration, it has been decided that Master Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor and Miss Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor will no longer hold the styles of Prince and Princess. This decision reflects their current status as private citizens residing abroad and the expectation that they will live normal lives, free of royal obligation. The words were clinical, devoid of warmth, yet they carried the full weight of centuries of tradition and hierarchy. For Harry, however, they landed like a gut punch. He sat slumped on the edge of his bed in Montecito, staring at the printed copy of the statement Meghan had placed in his hand minutes earlier. The Californian sunshine streamed through the open windows, birds chirped in the garden outside, but inside, the air felt thick and oppressive. Normal lives, Harry muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the text again and again as if sheer repetition would make the words change. That's what they call it. Stripping my children of their birthright. Reducing them to nothing. Meghan, seated on the armchair across the room, didn't answer. Her face was composed, but her hands betrayed her calm exterior, twisting the corner of her robe until her knuckles turned white. Harry rose abruptly and began pacing the room, running a hand through his already tousled hair. His mind churned with memories. Archie's christening in Windsor, the private conversations with Charles about Lilibet's name and her right to be called princess. Promises were made. Promises were broken. This isn't about tradition or modernization, Harry said, his voice rising with every word. This is punishment. It's retaliation. They're using my children as pawns in their little game. Meghan finally spoke, her voice soft but laced with an edge of steel. Harry, you know they'll say this was inevitable, that we gave up the titles when we left. We didn't give up anything, Harry shot back, his eyes blazing. We stepped back to protect our family. I didn't walk away so they could erase Archie and Lilibet from history. Thousands of miles away, in the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace, the mood was far less emotional. King Charles sat at the head of a long mahogany table in the green drawing room, surrounded by advisors and senior aides. The decision had not come easily, but in the king's mind, it had come necessarily. It is the right thing to do, Charles said quietly, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. His voice carried the weight of finality, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. One of his closest advisers, Sir Edward Vance, nodded in approval. "Your Majesty, this will set a clear precedent. The monarchy cannot afford to appear fractured. By limiting titles to working royals, you send a powerful message about duty and service." Charles let out a weary sigh. "I only hope they will one day understand why this was needed." But even as he spoke, Charles knew there would be no understanding from Harry. News of the decision broke like wildfire across the British press. King Charles streamlines monarchy. Archie and Lilibet lose royal titles. Harry and Meghan's children no longer prince and princess. A bold step or a cruel punishment. The headlines were polarizing. Some praised the king for taking a firm stance, arguing that Harry and Meghan had chosen to walk away from royal duties and should not expect their children to benefit from the privileges of titles. Others, however, accused the palace of vindictiveness, punishing two innocent children for the perceived sins of their parents. On social media, the response was even more divided. Hashtags like #JusticeForArchie and #ModernMonarchy began trending within hours. In Montecito, Harry was oblivious to the growing online storm. His rage burned too hot for him to focus on anything except the words of that statement and the face of the man who had issued it. His father. For all the hurt and anger that had festered between them over the years, some part of Harry had still believed Charles would never cross this line. He was wrong. "They've stripped my children of their names," Harry said bitterly, standing now at the kitchen counter, his hands gripping the edge so hard his knuckles turned white. "It's not enough they took away our security, our home, our dignity. Now they've taken Archie and Lilibet's titles too. What's next? Are they going to erase them from the line of succession?" Meghan stepped forward cautiously. "Harry, we need to think carefully about our next move." But Harry wasn't listening. His mind was already racing through 1,000 possibilities, 1,000 ways to fight back. And then it hit him, the recordings. In a private vault in California, Harry had stored hours of audio from tense family conversations over the years. Heated arguments with Charles, strained exchanges with William, and even tearful pleas from himself as he tried to broker peace. The recordings were never meant to see the light of day. But now, with Archie and Lilibet's future at stake, Harry felt the temptation growing stronger. "They won't listen to reason," Harry said, more to himself than to Meghan. "Maybe it's time the world hears what they're really like behind closed doors." Meghan's eyes widened slightly. "Harry, if you do that, there's no going back." "There's no back to go to," Harry replied coldly. Back in London, the palace braced for the Sussexes' response. "They'll make noise," predicted one aide as they huddled around a table in the press office. "They always do. But this time, we have the moral high ground." Or so they thought. Because in Montecito, Harry wasn't just preparing to make noise. He was preparing to launch an all-out war. The Montecito mansion, usually a sanctuary of calm and seclusion, was now charged with an electric tension. Harry couldn't sit still. He stormed from room to room, his bare feet slapping against the polished wooden floors, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Meghan trailed behind him at first, her voice soft but firm, trying to get through to him, but it was clear her words weren't landing. Harry's eyes were wild, glassy with unshed tears that he fought to blink away. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his hands curled into fists so tight the knuckles stood out stark white against his flushed skin. It was as if all the years of hurt, humiliation, and betrayal had come to a head in this single moment. "This is it," he spat, his voice breaking. "This is the line. They've gone too far this time." He reached for a glass of water on the counter but thought better of it and slammed it back down so hard it cracked against the granite surface. Meghan flinched. "Harry, please," she said gently. "You need to take a breath." But Harry's rage wasn't something that could be contained by deep breathing or meditation. This wasn't a fleeting anger over a tabloid headline or an unfair photograph. This was something far deeper, more primal. "It's not just about me anymore," he snapped, spinning around to face her. His voice thundered in the high-ceilinged kitchen. "They're going after our children now. Archie and Lilibet didn't ask for this. They didn't choose this life. And still, they're being punished because of me." Meghan stepped closer, her hand reaching for his arm. "I know," she said softly. "I know it feels like an attack. And maybe it is. But Harry, think. If you let them provoke you, they'll win. But Harry pulled away. No, this isn't about winning or losing. This is about my children's future. About their names. About their right to know where they come from and who they are. The memories flooded him, unbidden and merciless. He saw himself at 12 years old, walking behind his mother's coffin, cameras clicking in a morbid symphony as the world watched his grief. He saw himself at Sandringham, begging his family to listen to his fears for Meghan's safety, only to be met with blank stares and cold reassurances. And he saw himself in countless moments of doubt and pain, wondering if breaking away from the firm had been worth the cost. Now, standing in his California home, he felt the answer burning in his chest. Yes, he whispered to himself. It was worth it, but I won't let them take Archie and Lily from me too. Not this time. The phone on the kitchen island buzzed. It was a text from an old friend still connected to the palace. Mate, just seen the news. Brace yourself. They're calling it modernization. But everyone knows this is personal. Harry let out a bitter laugh. Modernization. That's what they're calling revenge these days. His hand hovered over the phone, tempted to dial his father directly. But what would he say? What could he say to a man who had just effectively cut off his grandchildren from their royal lineage? Instead, he scrolled through his contacts until he found another number. A journalist he trusted. Someone who had always given him a fair shake, even when the British press vilified him as a spoiled prince. His thumb hovered over the call button. Harry, no, Meghan said firmly, sensing his intent. Not yet. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you unravel. That's what they want. Harry dropped the phone onto the counter and turned away, running both hands through his hair. In London, meanwhile, the palace was already preparing for his reaction. Senior aides had gathered in the private secretary's office, sipping tea and exchanging wary glances as they braced for the inevitable. He's going to lash out, one aide murmured. He always does. And we'll be ready, another replied. We have our narrative. The king is modernizing, streamlining. Harry can shout all he wants. It won't change the facts. But deep down, they knew this wasn't just about facts. This was about emotion, loyalty, and legacy. And Harry's emotions had always been his most dangerous weapon. Back in Montecito, Meghan had retreated upstairs to check on the children, leaving Harry alone in the kitchen. The house felt oppressively silent now. Too silent. He could hear the faint murmur of Archie's laughter from somewhere above, the innocent giggle of a boy blissfully unaware of the storm swirling around his name. It made Harry's chest tighten painfully. They don't deserve this, he whispered, his voice hoarse. They're just kids. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. For a moment, he let the tears come. Hot, angry tears that he hadn't allowed himself to shed in years. Then, slowly, he straightened, wiped his face, and felt a hard resolve settle over him like armor. They think they've won, he murmured to himself. But they don't know me. Not really. Not yet. In that moment, Harry made a decision. He would fight. Not with fists or with fury. Not yet. But with words, with truth, and if necessary, with secrets the monarchy would rather keep buried forever. He didn't know how far he would go, but he knew this much. If King Charles wanted war, he was about to get one. Buckingham Palace stood majestic and unshaken, its iconic white stone facade gleaming under the weak London sun. But inside, the air was thick with tension. Behind the gilded doors and centuries-old tapestries, King Charles sat alone in his private study, staring at the statement he had just authorized. The room smelled faintly of old books, leather, and polished wood. It was a space Charles often retreated to when burdened by the weight of the crown, a place where he could wrestle with decisions too difficult to discuss with even his closest advisors. This morning, however, he felt no comfort here. The decision to strip Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana of their titles was not one he had made lightly. To the public, it would appear calculated, just another step in his grand plan to slim down the monarchy and make it more efficient for a modern Britain. But deep down, Charles knew this was about more than modernization. This was about control. For years, Charles had watched his youngest son drift further and further away from the family. First, there were whispers of discontent during Harry's military tours. Then came Meghan, an outsider whose arrival had shaken the foundations of royal tradition. And finally, there was the couple's dramatic exit from royal life, their explosive enter. At first, Charles tried to be patient. He told himself Harry was hurting, confused, lashing out because he felt abandoned. But as the years went by and the Sussexes built their empire in California, signing Netflix deals, publishing memoirs, and giving interviews that painted the royals as cold and calculating, Charles began to lose his patience. The monarchy had survived wars, scandals, and abdications. It could not afford to be held hostage by a wayward prince and his American wife. But why the children? Why Archie and Lilibet, two innocent souls who had no say in their parents' choices? According to palace insiders, Charles believed titles came with obligations. To be a prince or princess of the United Kingdom was not just an honor. It was a commitment to serve. And Archie and Lilibet, growing up in Montecito with no ties to royal duties, would never fulfill that commitment. They are American children now, one senior aide reportedly said during a strategy meeting. They will live as private citizens, attend private schools, and forge careers entirely outside the institution. Why burden them with titles that will only confuse their identity and invite unwanted attention? Charles had agreed. Or at least, that's what he told himself. But those who knew the king best suspected there was another reason, one he would never admit publicly. For Charles, family had always been complicated. He had grown up in a world where duty came before affection, where emotions were concealed behind a stiff upper lip and personal desires were sacrificed on the altar of tradition. His relationship with his own parents had been distant at best, and his role as a father to William and Harry was marred by divorce, scandal, and tragedy. Perhaps, some whispered, Charles was projecting his own guilt and regrets onto Harry's children. Perhaps he believed that denying Archie and Lilibet their titles would spare them the pain of being half in and half out of a world they could never fully belong to. Or perhaps, as Harry would soon argue, it was nothing more than petty revenge. Meanwhile, in Montecito, Harry was piecing together his own narrative. "They've always wanted to control me," Harry said bitterly, pacing the living room as Meghan sat silently on the couch, her laptop perched precariously on her knees. "And now they're trying to control my children too. It's not about tradition. It's about power. It's always been about power." Meghan hesitated before speaking. Maybe your father believes he's protecting them in his own way." Harry froze, then turned to her with an incredulous look. Protecting them? By taking away their birthright? By erasing their place in history? Meghan didn't answer. She knew Harry wasn't looking for a debate. He was looking for a reason to fight. Back in London, royal advisors were already preparing their defense for when Harry inevitably went public. "We need to get ahead of the narrative," one senior aide advised during an emergency meeting. "We position this as a compassionate decision. The king doesn't want Archie and Lilibet weighed down by the expectations and scrutiny that come with titles. We emphasize that he's giving them freedom." Freedom, another advisor scoffed quietly. Or exile. But no one dared say those words aloud in the presence of the king. Charles, for his part, remained stoic as he listened to his team strategize. But deep inside, a storm was brewing. He knew Harry wouldn't take this quietly. As night fell over London, Charles retired to his private quarters and stared out the window at the city lights below. He thought about Harry, the little boy who had once clung to his leg during public engagements, who had laughed uncontrollably at silly jokes, who had cried in his arms after Diana's funeral. Where had it all gone wrong? Perhaps there was still time to make amends. Or perhaps the rift was already too deep to heal. In Montecito, Harry was wide awake. The house was silent now, Meghan and the children asleep upstairs. But Harry's mind refused to rest. He sat in the darkened living room, scrolling through old photos of his family on his phone, smiling faces from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Then he opened the voice memo app. It was all there. Years of private conversations, arguments, accusations, confessions. If the palace wanted war, Harry thought grimly, he was ready to fight. This wasn't just about Archie and Lilibet anymore. This was about truth, about justice, about finally breaking free from the chains of a family that had bound him all his life. The Montecito estate was shrouded in a deep, unsettling quiet. Outside, the night air was heavy with the faint scent of eucalyptus and the distant hum of waves crashing against the California coast. Inside, Prince Harry sat hunched over in his study, staring at his laptop screen as though it held the answers to all his troubles. The glow of the monitor lit his face, casting deep shadows under his eyes. On the screen was a folder marked Private Audio, Palace. His finger hovered over the track list as his heart pounded like a war drum in his chest. This was his nuclear option. For years, Harry had kept these recordings locked away. Some were voice memos saved during heated phone calls with his father. Others were surreptitiously recorded conversations during his last fraught meetings with senior royals. Tense negotiations, bitter arguments, and moments of raw emotion the palace would never want exposed to the world. He had told himself he'd never use them. That no matter how bad things got, he wouldn't stoop to that level. But this was different. This was about Archie and Lilibet. About two innocent children being erased from their legacy. About a monarchy that had pushed him to the brink again and again. They forced my hand, Harry murmured to himself, running a hand down his face. The first recording was from nearly 4 years ago, days before Harry and Meghan announced their decision to step back as senior royals. "You're overreacting, Harry." Charles's voice crackled through the speakers. "You cannot simply walk away. It doesn't work like that. I'm not overreacting. I'm protecting my wife. I'm protecting my family. And if you can't see the damage this institution is doing to us, then maybe I don't belong here anymore." There was a pause on the line, followed by the clipped tones of Prince William. "You're selfish, Harry. You're tearing this family apart because you can't handle the pressure. Diana would be ashamed." The words hit like a knife, even now. Harry's jaw tightened as he replayed the moment in his mind. Diana would be ashamed. It was always Diana. The palace invoked her name when it suited them, yet they had treated her with the same cold indifference they now showed Meghan. Harry's hand trembled as he reached for his phone. He opened his contacts and scrolled past names that once felt like home, but now were just ghosts. William, Charles, Camilla. Instead, he stopped on a different name. A journalist in Los Angeles who had offered a sympathetic ear during the stormiest days of Spare's release. He didn't press call. Not yet. Meghan's voice drifted softly from the hallway. "Harry." He quickly minimized the folder and shut the laptop. She appeared in the doorway, her robe cinched tightly around her. "It's late. Come to bed." Harry nodded but didn't move. "Are you thinking about it?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. "What would you do, Meg, if it were your children?" Meghan crossed the room and knelt in front of him, resting her hands on his knees. "I would burn it all down," she said softly. "But only if I was sure I could live with the ashes." Harry met her gaze. "That's the thing. I don't know if I can live with the silence anymore." Across the Atlantic, the palace's PR team was already working overtime to prepare for Harry's retaliation. "He has ammunition," warned Sir Edward Vance, Charles's senior communications secretary. "We know he does. Those calls, those meetings, if they ever became public, the damage would be catastrophic." Charles sat stiffly at the head of the table, his hands folded so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. "Then we make sure they don't," he said curtly. "We remind him what's at stake." "What if he doesn't care anymore?" another advisor asked hesitantly. Charles didn't answer, because deep down, he feared that was exactly the case. The next morning, Harry stared out over the Montecito hills, the rising sun bathing the landscape in golden light. It should have been a peaceful scene, but his mind was a battlefield. What would happen if he released the tapes? The world would hear his father's icy tone, his brother's biting words, the private conversations that revealed cracks in the royal facade. It would vindicate Harry and Meghan, prove they hadn't been exaggerating in their interviews. But it would also escalate the war to a point of no return. He thought of Archie and Lilibet, still too young to understand the gravity of their situation. One day, they would read about this moment. One day, they would ask him why he didn't fight harder for them. Harry clenched his jaw. Maybe releasing the recordings wasn't a betrayal. Maybe it was justice. In London, the palace's courtiers buzzed with rumors. "Harry's bluffing." One insisted over coffee in the staff dining room. "No," said another. "You didn't hear him on that last Zoom call. He's not bluffing. He's furious. And when Harry gets like that, there's no telling what he'll do." By midday, Charles had personally instructed his aides to draft a letter to Harry, a plea for calm disguised as a formal note. But even as the ink dried on the parchment, the king knew it might be too late. Harry wasn't the boy they could control anymore. Back in California, Harry stared once more at the laptop screen. One click. That's all it would take. One click to send the recordings to a trusted journalist, and the monarchy would be engulfed in a firestorm. But as his finger hovered over the trackpad, Meghan placed her hand gently over his. "Not tonight," she whispered. "Sleep on it." Harry didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, he closed the laptop. But the decision wasn't over. It was only deferred. The morning sun spilled across the Montecito estate like liquid gold, casting long, elegant shadows against the sprawling villa. In the kitchen, Meghan stood at the marble counter, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of chamomile tea. She wasn't drinking it. She was staring into the swirling liquid, her expression unreadable. Harry had been pacing since dawn. His anger, which the night before had been volcanic and raw, had cooled into something more focused, more dangerous. But Meghan wasn't pacing. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't even crying. She was planning. To the outside world, Meghan Markle had always been painted in extremes. Either the doe-eyed American actress swept up in a fairy tale, or the scheming villain who tore a prince from his family. But Meghan knew better than anyone how to control a narrative. And right now, as Harry fumed and plotted, she understood that her greatest weapon wasn't rage. It was silence. "Meg, we can't just sit here and do nothing," Harry said, his voice sharp with frustration. He ran a hand through his hair, making it stand on end. "They're winning. Every second we stay quiet, they're controlling the story." Meghan set her mug down gently, her movements precise and deliberate. "Are they?" she asked calmly. Harry stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "You don't get it. This isn't a PR game. This is our children's lives. Their titles, their legacy, their place in history, gone." "I get it," Meghan said, her voice low. "But if you explode right now, they'll say you're unhinged. They'll say you're proving their point." Harry's face flushed with anger. "So what? I'm supposed to just let them strip Archie and Lily of their birthright while we sip tea and smile for the cameras?" Meghan crossed the room and placed her hands on his shoulders, forcing him to meet her gaze. "No," she said softly. "You're going to let them think they've won. And then, when the moment is right, you'll hit back so hard they won't know what hit them." Back in London, the palace was already working to shape the narrative. "The Duchess is quiet," observed one royal aide during a media strategy meeting. "Too quiet." "It's calculated," another chimed in. "She's waiting for Harry to take the bait so she can swoop in later as the voice of reason." King Charles sat at the head of the table, listening silently as his advisors speculated about Meghan's next move. He had underestimated her once before, and he knew better than to make the same mistake twice. "She's not impulsive like Harry," Charles said finally. "She's methodical, strategic. That makes her far more dangerous." In Montecito, Meghan's phone buzzed with messages from friends, allies, and media contacts. This could be the perfect moment for a statement. "Would you consider sitting down for another interview? People want to hear from you." But Meghan didn't respond. Not yet. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to defend her children, to shout their truth from the rooftops, to counter the palace's carefully worded lies. But she had learned the hard way that in the royal game, the loudest voice wasn't always the most effective. Sometimes the greatest power lay in restraint. Harry, however, didn't share her patience. At lunch, he slammed his fork down and pushed his plate away. "They're painting us as attention seekers again. Look at these headlines. Harry and Meghan furious over titles stripped. It makes us sound petty, vindictive. That's exactly why we stay quiet," Meghan said, her tone gentle but firm. "Let them tire themselves out. Let them underestimate us. And then, when the world isn't expecting it, we tell our story, on our terms." Harry stared at her, his chest heaving. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy," Meghan admitted. "It's survival." Behind closed doors, Meghan was already putting the pieces in place. She spoke to her most trusted advisors, PR strategists, legal experts, and a handful of journalists known for their sympathetic coverage. She didn't instruct them to release anything yet. Instead, she listened. She gathered information. She waited. This wasn't about reacting. This was about winning. In the British press, Meghan's silence was interpreted in 1,000 different ways. Is Meghan Markle finally defeated? Why isn't Meghan speaking up for Archie and Lilibet? The Duchess's silence speaks volumes. What they didn't realize was that her silence wasn't weakness. It was a weapon. Late one night, after the children were asleep, Harry and Meghan sat on the patio, the cool air carrying the faint scent of lavender from the garden below. "You're always so calm," Harry said, staring out at the dark horizon. "I'm not calm," Meghan said quietly. "I'm focused." Harry turned to look at her. "How do you do it? How do you stay so composed when all I want to do is scream?" Meghan took his hand in hers. "Because I've been here before. The noise, the chaos, the headlines, they don't matter. What matters is the long game. And Harry," she squeezed his hand gently, "we're going to win the long game." The next morning, Meghan declined yet another interview request. She didn't post on social media. She didn't issue a statement. But behind her measured exterior, plans were already in motion. Because Meghan Markle understood something the palace never had. In a world addicted to noise, silence could be the loudest sound of all. The news had barely settled in the public consciousness when whispers began circulating about Prince William's involvement in King Charles's decision. It started as a faint murmur in the corners of royal reporting circles and quickly grew louder. Behind the polished image of duty and family unity, there were rumors of meetings in shadowed rooms, of words exchanged in low, deliberate tones, and of a brother quietly endorsing a move that would sever his nephew and niece from the institution forever. To Harry, the suggestion felt like betrayal layered upon betrayal. It was late evening in Montecito when Harry's phone buzzed with a message from a source he'd known since his days at Eton, someone who had remained quietly loyal even after Harry crossed the Atlantic. "You didn't hear this from me, but it wasn't just your father's call. W was in the room." He agreed. He said it was the only way to protect the crown. Harry read the message 3 times, the words blurring as his eyes burned. He set the phone down slowly, his hand trembling with anger. "William," he muttered under his breath, the name tasting bitter on his tongue. It wasn't entirely a shock, not after years of growing distance and misunderstandings. But knowing it for certain, seeing it spelled out so plainly, sent a fresh wave of hurt and rage crashing over him. "He was supposed to protect them," Harry said aloud, his voice rising. "If not as their uncle, then as the future king. He knows what it's like to grow up in that family. He knows." Meghan, seated across from him, kept her expression carefully neutral. But Harry could see the flicker of unease in her eyes. "What if it's not true?" she asked cautiously. "It's true," Harry said firmly. "It's exactly the kind of thing William would do. He's so obsessed with preserving the image of the monarchy that he'll sacrifice anyone, even his own niece and nephew." Thousands of miles away, in Kensington Palace, William sat in his private study, staring at his own phone as messages flooded in from advisors and confidants. The decision to support his father had not come easily. For all his disagreements with Harry, William had once adored his younger brother, protected him, even covered for his recklessness when they were teenagers. But that was before Meghan, before the Oprah interview, before Spare. Now, William saw Harry not as a brother, but as a liability, an unpredictable force capable of dragging the monarchy into the mud with every headline and every unsanctioned confession. "We had no choice," William said quietly to his private secretary. "Harry and Meghan left. They've made it clear they want nothing to do with us. Why should Archie and Lilibet carry royal titles if they're being raised as Americans?" The secretary hesitated. "Sir, some will see this as punitive." "They're children," William snapped. "No one is punishing them. We're protecting the crown. And one day, they might even thank us for giving them normal lives." But even as he spoke the words, a small voice in the back of his mind asked if he truly believed them. In Montecito, Harry's anger had hardened into resolve. He scrolled through his phone until he found William's contact. His thumb hovered over the call button. "What are you going to say?" Meghan asked quietly. Harry stared at the screen, his jaw tight. "I don't know." But he pressed the button anyway. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then William's voice filled the line, cold and clipped. "Harry." Harry's breath caught for a moment, and then the words tumbled out, hot and unrestrained. "You did it, didn't you? You sat there and nodded along while Dad erased my children from the family." "Harry, don't harry me. You knew how much this would hurt. You knew what those titles meant. And you didn't care." "I cared about the monarchy," William said sharply. "Something you clearly don't understand anymore." There was a long pause. "You've chosen your side, Will," Harry said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't be surprised when I choose mine." And then he hung up. The next morning, headlines exploded across the globe. Brother against brother. William backs Charles in stripping Archie and Lilibet's titles. Royal rift deepens as Harry accuses William of betrayal. Future king's role in family feud revealed. The palace scrambled to issue a statement, denying that William had influenced the decision. But the damage was already done. The public, long fascinated by the fractured bond between the brothers, had chosen sides. On social media, hashtags like #TeamHarry and #TeamWilliam trended for days. In Montecito, Harry sat with Meghan in the quiet of their garden, watching Archie chase butterflies under the California sun. "I can't believe he'd do this," Harry murmured. "We went through hell together, Will and I. And now he's siding with the same institution that destroyed Mom." Meghan took his hand gently. "Maybe he thinks he's protecting something bigger than both of you." Harry shook his head. "There's nothing bigger than family." But even as he spoke, he knew the family he once had was gone. Buckingham Palace had weathered storms before. Scandals, divorces, abdications, even whispers of treason. The monarchy had survived them all. But as the sun rose over London, illuminating the imposing facade of the palace, the atmosphere inside felt unusually tense. In a windowless room buried deep within the building, the palace's press team huddled around a long oak table, papers and iPads scattered across its polished surface. The hum of urgency hung in the air. "Harry's fury is spreading like wildfire," muttered Sir Edward Vance, the King's communications secretary, scrolling through Twitter on his tablet. "Every headline is about his children being stripped of titles. The Americans are calling it cruel. Even some of the British press are starting to waver." Lady Fiona Wells, a veteran royal PR strategist, tapped her manicured nails against a folder marked Crisis Management. "We need to regain control of the narrative before Harry makes his next move. If he releases those recordings." The room fell silent. The thought hung there, heavy and dangerous. King Charles entered quietly, his face pale and drawn, his normally impeccable suit slightly rumpled. "Your Majesty," Sir Edward said cautiously. "With respect, we need to respond more aggressively. The Sussexes are spinning this as an attack on their children. If we stay passive, they'll win the sympathy of the public." Charles sank into the chair at the head of the table, pinching the bridge of his nose. "We're not attacking children. We're protecting the monarchy." "That's not how it looks," Fiona said gently. "To the world, it seems like the royal family is punishing Archie and Lilibet for their parents' choices. And Harry knows how to play the victim." The king's lips pressed into a thin line. "What do you suggest?" The PR team proposed a three-pronged strategy. Humanize the decision, frame the stripping of titles as an act of compassion, an effort to let Archie and Lilibet live normal, pressure-free lives outside the glare of royal duty. Highlight the Sussexes' hypocrisy, quietly feed the media stories about Harry and Meghan's lucrative deals and celebrity lifestyle. If they wanted privacy, why were they constantly in the spotlight? Reinforce the royal image, showcase Charles and Camilla's dedication to service, with carefully staged photo opportunities and engagements that emphasize stability and continuity. "Make them look like the steady hand on the tiller," Fiona said, "while Harry and Meghan come across as chaotic and self-serving." Charles nodded reluctantly. "Do it." Within hours, the plan was in motion. Palace-friendly newspapers ran sympathetic articles. Charles's brave decision, giving Archie and Lilibet freedom from royal shackles. The king's heartfelt desire to protect his grandchildren. In contrast, tabloids hostile to the Sussexes blasted out scathing pieces. From privacy pleas to Netflix deals, Harry and Meghan's contradictions exposed. Why should Californian children hold royal titles? The palace's well-oiled media machine began to turn public opinion, if only slightly. In Montecito, Harry and Meghan watched it all unfold. "They're doing it again," Harry muttered darkly, scrolling through headlines on his phone. "Twisting the story. Making me out to be the villain." Meghan sat cross-legged on the couch, her face calm, but her eyes sharp. "This isn't new, Harry. This is how they've always operated. Leaks to friendly journalists. Backroom deals. Smear campaigns. They're trying to control the narrative." Harry's jaw tightened. Not this time. Behind closed doors, Meghan's PR advisors were quick to counter the palace's moves. Silence was strategic up to a point, one advisor told her in a private Zoom call. "But now we need to drip-feed details to keep control of the conversation. Humanize your family. Remind people of the racism claims, the mental health struggles. Position Harry as the protective father, fighting for his kids." Meghan nodded slowly. Not yet, she said. We let them overplay their hand first. Are you sure? The advisor pressed. Meghan's lips curved into the faintest smile. They don't realize they're fighting the wrong battle. At Buckingham Palace, the staff began to sense cracks forming beneath their carefully crafted strategy. Harry's holding back, Fiona murmured during a late-night meeting. He hasn't released those recordings yet. That's what worries me. Charles's fingers drummed against the armrest of his chair. He won't do it. He knows it would be crossing a line. But in his heart, Charles wasn't sure anymore. Harry had crossed oceans to protect his family. Would he stop short of crossing that line? Meanwhile, in the quiet of Montecito, Harry stood on the balcony, staring out into the starless night. They think they've won, he whispered to himself. But they've forgotten one thing. He glanced toward his office, where his laptop sat waiting, the folder of recordings still unopened but always present in his mind. This isn't their story to tell anymore. It's mine. The Montecito home was alive with quiet tension. Every room felt charged, as if the air itself vibrated with anticipation. Harry sat at the edge of his office chair, staring blankly at his phone. The glow of the screen reflected in his tired eyes. Meghan stood in the doorway, her arms crossed lightly over her chest. She wasn't speaking yet. She didn't have to. Both of them knew they were on the cusp of a decision that could ignite a firestorm around the world. The palace had made its move. The titles were gone, the narrative set in motion. King Charles portrayed as the benevolent grandfather, William painted as the steady heir preserving royal dignity, and Harry cast yet again as the reckless prince destroying his family from afar. But Meghan had been silent long enough. And Harry's fury, which had simmered for days, was now focused into something sharper, something dangerous. Let's do it, he said finally, his voice low but steady. If they want war, they'll get war. The plan wasn't born from impulse. It was the product of weeks of whispered strategy sessions, late-night calls to allies, and measured consultations with legal and PR advisors. Meghan's silence hadn't been hesitation, it had been preparation. They knew the risks. If they hit too hard, the monarchy would accuse them of treachery, of trying to bring down the crown itself. If they moved too softly, they'd be drowned out by the palace's relentless media machine. So Meghan devised a strategy designed not just to counter the palace's narrative, but to flip it on its head. It has to feel natural, Meghan told her team during a video call. It can't be a press release or some stiff, formal statement. It needs to be personal, emotional, human. An interview, suggested one advisor. No, Meghan said firmly. Not yet. We need to control every frame, every word. No interruptions. No edits we can't approve. This has to be our voice, unfiltered. The next morning, Harry and Meghan sat side by side in their sunlit living room as their trusted videographer adjusted the camera angles. There would be no glitz, no staged opulence. Meghan wore a soft cream sweater and jeans. Harry looked casual but resolute. The children were asleep upstairs, unaware that their parents were about to fire the first real shot in a battle that could shape their futures. Ready? The videographer asked softly. Harry nodded. The red light blinked on. Harry spoke first, his voice calm but edged with emotion. For years, Meghan and I have done everything we could to protect our children, not just from the relentless media intrusion, but from the kind of institution that can crush a person's spirit if you let it. We stepped back from royal duties because we wanted to raise Archie and Lilibet in peace. We wanted them to grow up knowing they were loved, not because of titles, but because of who they are. He paused, his jaw tightening. But now, the monarchy has made a decision that impacts our children in a way we can't ignore. Stripping them of their birthright wasn't about modernization or slimming down the monarchy. It was about punishment. Punishment for choices Meghan and I made as adults. Meghan placed a gentle hand on his arm, then spoke. This isn't just about titles. It's about erasure. It's about rewriting history so that Archie and Lilibet don't know where they come from or what they are a part of. We refuse to let that happen. Her voice caught slightly, her eyes glistening. I know what it's like to grow up feeling like you don't belong. I won't let my children feel that way. Not in America, and certainly not because of decisions made in Buckingham Palace. The video, simple and raw, was uploaded directly to their joint account. Within minutes, it began to spread. On social media, millions of comments poured in. They're fighting for their kids. Any parent would do the same. The royals should be ashamed of themselves. Why are they even talking about this? Didn't they leave the royal family? The reactions were polarized, but Harry and Meghan didn't care. For the first time in weeks, they felt like they had regained control of the narrative. Across the Atlantic, the palace erupted in chaos. They've posted a video. A frantic aide told Sir Edward Vance, thrusting a tablet into his hands. King Charles watched in silence, his face an unreadable mask, but his fingers drummed furiously on the armrest of his chair. They're emotional, Vance said cautiously. The public eats that up. Then counter it, Charles snapped. Remind people this was for Archie and Lilibet's own good. We can't let them make us look like villains. But Harry and Meghan weren't done. 2 days later, excerpts from Harry's unpublished diaries appeared in a trusted American outlet. The passages painted a vivid, heartbreaking picture of his struggles growing up in the royal family, his fears for his children, and his determination to break the cycle. Then came the audio leaks, not the full recordings, but carefully chosen snippets that exposed cold conversations with senior royals about security, race, and the value of titles. The world listened in stunned silence. Do you really expect us to fund security for children who aren't even going to live here? One voice, allegedly Charles's, could be heard saying. The reaction was immediate. Headlines screamed across front pages. Harry drops bombshell audio on palace. The royal family's darkest secrets exposed. Will the monarchy survive this? Support for Harry and Meghan surged in America and parts of Europe. In the UK, opinions remained split, but even longtime royal supporters admitted the recordings were damning. That evening, as Meghan rocked Lilibet to sleep and Harry checked on Archie, the house felt calm for the first time in weeks. They'll come for us harder now, Meghan said quietly as she kissed Lilibet's forehead. Let them, Harry replied. They wanted a fight. Now they have one. The world awoke to a storm the morning after Harry and Meghan's video went live. News anchors spoke in hushed tones, their faces a mix of fascination and shock as they replayed clips of the Sussexes sitting in their Montecito living room, Harry's voice laced with controlled fury, Meghan's quiet composure masking an undercurrent of fire. Across social media platforms, the video spread like wildfire. Within hours, hashtags dominated global trends. Hashtag Protect Archie and Lilibet, hashtag In-Royal Revenge, hashtag Team Harry and Meghan, countered by hashtag Respect the Monarchy, hashtag Not Your Titles, and a growing wave of resentment from staunch royalists who viewed the Sussexes' revelations as nothing short of treachery. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a cultural war. In New York, talk show hosts dissected every frame of the video. Look at Harry's eyes, said one host, leaning forward over her desk. This isn't performative. This is a father ready to burn it all down to protect his kids. In London, however, the tone was far more critical. They've chosen to abandon royal life, declared a veteran commentator on a popular morning program. Why do they expect to keep royal privileges for children they're raising in America? This is entitlement dressed up as victimhood. Even in households far from Montecito or London, dinner table conversations grew heated. I think they're brave, said one young woman in Sydney, scrolling through her phone as her father scoffed across the table. Brave? They're millionaires crying about titles they didn't even want, he retorted. Around the globe, families, friends, and even strangers online took sides, their arguments fueled by deeply personal beliefs about family, tradition, and fairness. At Buckingham Palace, the walls seemed to vibrate with tension. They're winning the emotional war, whispered a senior aide in the communications office. People connect with children. Even those who dislike Meghan feel protective when it comes to Archie and Lilibet. Sir Edward Vance frowned as he scanned the latest opinion polls. Support for the monarchy in the UK remained steady, but approval ratings among younger Britons were slipping. In America, Harry and Meghan's popularity had soared overnight. The longer this drags on, he said grimly, the harder it will be to claw back control. King Charles sat silently at the end of the long table, his face pale, his jaw tight. He knew public perception mattered. The monarchy's strength wasn't just in laws and traditions. It was in the hearts of the people. And right now, Harry and Meghan were capturing hearts in ways he could not. Meanwhile, in Montecito, Harry and Meghan watched the chaos unfold on their phones and laptops. They didn't expect this, Meghan murmured, scrolling through a flood of supportive tweets and Instagram posts. They thought people would turn on us. Instead, they're rallying. Harry exhaled slowly, his hands clasped together. It's not over. Not by a long shot. But not everyone was in their corner. In Britain, royal loyalists gathered outside Buckingham Palace waving Union Jacks and chanting slogans in support of the king. They made their bed, shouted one man into a reporter's microphone. They wanted out of royal life. Fine, but they don't get to cherry-pick the perks they want to keep. In tabloid columns and online forums, venomous words spilled freely. Meghan was labeled manipulative, Harry ungrateful. Even Archie and Lilibet weren't spared, described cruelly by some as ordinary Americans who didn't deserve royal privileges. The divide grew sharper with each passing day. In Washington, D.C., a prominent senator tweeted, "Every child deserves security and protection, no matter their parents' decisions. The UK should reconsider this punitive action." In contrast, a British MP fired back, "This is a sovereign matter for the Crown." Perhaps the Sussexes should focus on building their own legacy instead of clinging to titles they abandoned. The battle lines were drawn, not just within the royal family, but across nations and generations. Yet amid the cacophony of voices, there were quieter, more poignant moments. A video went viral of a young black mother tearfully explaining why Meghan's words about erasure resonated with her. "They're not fighting for status," she said into her phone's camera. "They're fighting so their kids aren't told they don't belong. And as a mother, I feel that in my bones." In Montecito, Meghan saw the clip and wiped a tear from her cheek. "This is bigger than us," she whispered. But even as support poured in, the couple braced themselves for the counterstrike. "They're not going to take this lying down," Harry said, staring at his phone late one night. "The palace, the tabloids, they'll come after us harder now." Meghan placed her hand gently over his. "Let them. The truth is on our side." Back in London, William strode briskly into Clarence's house, his face set in a grim mask. He had just left a meeting with advisors where they discussed escalating the PR offensive against his brother. "This isn't about Harry anymore," William said coldly. "This is about the future of the monarchy. We can't let them tear it down brick by brick." His words echoed through the room like a vow. But deep down, even William knew the war was no longer about titles or tradition. It was about survival. The sun was setting in Montecito, casting long orange streaks across the hills, when Harry stood alone in his garden, staring at the horizon. His thoughts weren't in California. They were thousands of miles away, drifting through the corridors of Kensington Palace, across the cobblestones of Kensington Gardens, and into the quiet, private place where his mother's memory still lived. Diana. Her name had become both a shield and a weapon in this fight, one that Harry now clutched tightly to his chest. Harry had always believed his mother would have understood him in ways no one else in his family ever could. He thought of her often in moments like this, when his back was against the wall, when the press was out for blood, when he felt betrayed and abandoned by those who should have protected him. "She warned me about this," Harry whispered aloud, his voice carrying softly into the California evening breeze. "She told me they'd never let me go. She told me." He broke off, biting back the lump rising in his throat. Earlier that day, Meghan had found him in his study, hunched over a photo album. She knelt beside him quietly, her eyes softening as she saw what he was holding. It was a picture of Diana cradling a baby Harry, her expression radiant yet tinged with sadness. "She fought for you," Meghan said gently. "The way you're fighting for Archie and Lily now." Harry nodded. "She tried to shield us, but the institution chewed her up anyway." "Then let's not let history repeat itself," Meghan whispered. In London, the mere mention of Diana's name sent shivers down the spines of palace aides. "She's bringing her mother-in-law into this now," groaned one advisor as they skimmed through Meghan's latest statement. In her carefully chosen words, Meghan had invoked Diana's struggles within the monarchy, drawing clear parallels between the late princess's treatment and her own experiences. She saw the cracks in the system, Meghan said in a closed-door strategy session with her team. The way they isolate, control, and punish anyone who doesn't fall in line. And they punished her for it. The team agreed. Using Diana's story wasn't just a PR tactic. It was emotional truth, and it carried a resonance the palace couldn't counter. The public's reaction was immediate and visceral. Clips of Diana speaking about her isolation in her infamous 1995 Panorama interview resurfaced on social media. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. I was a problem. I was too emotional. Too much. Those words struck like lightning in the context of Meghan and Harry's battle. Many saw in Meghan a continuation of Diana's fight, a woman pushed to the brink by an ancient institution that demanded silence and submission. In Montecito, Harry spoke with a close confidant over a secure video call. "Sometimes I hear her voice," Harry admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "She tells me to keep going, to protect my family the way she tried to protect me." His confidant nodded gravely. "Invoking her name, it will make them uncomfortable, but it will remind people why you're doing this. For her, for Archie and Lilibet, for every person who's felt crushed by the weight of tradition." Meanwhile, at Kensington Palace, William stared at his own screen, his jaw tight as he watched Meghan's words circulate online. "They're weaponizing her memory," William said coldly during a private meeting with his advisors. "Mum wouldn't have wanted this. Wouldn't she?" one aide asked cautiously. William's face darkened. "She wouldn't have wanted the monarchy destroyed. She believed in service, in duty." But even as he spoke, a flicker of doubt passed across his face. Because William also remembered. He remembered his mother's tears, her desperate whispers in the dead of night, her arms wrapped protectively around him as the world outside the palace gates became more vicious by the day. In Montecito, Harry recorded another short video for his supporters, this time with a photo of Diana in the background. "She taught me to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard," Harry said quietly. "She paid the ultimate price for trying to live her truth. I won't let that happen to my wife. I won't let that happen to my children." This time, the message cut deeper than any previous statement. In homes around the world, people wept as they remembered the young boys walking behind their mother's coffin. The image of Harry, small, vulnerable, yet stoic, had been burned into collective memory. And now that little boy was grown, and he was fighting back. Back at Buckingham Palace, Charles stared out the window of his study, his reflection faint against the glass. "She's haunting us still," he murmured. "Your Majesty?" asked an aide nearby. "Nothing," Charles replied. "Nothing at all." But in his heart, he knew this war was no longer just about titles or royal protocols. This was about Diana, and Diana's ghost would not be silenced. The cold Scottish air hung heavy over Balmoral Castle, its granite walls looming like a fortress against the rolling mist that cloaked the Highlands. For centuries, this had been the royal family's sanctuary, a place of escape from the relentless public eye, where family disputes and decisions were quietly resolved behind ancient oak doors. But this time, Balmoral felt less like a refuge and more like a war room. King Charles sat in the library, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, as the fire crackled and spat embers into the air. His face was drawn and pale, the weight of recent weeks pressing down on his shoulders like a leaden cloak. Across from him, Camilla sat stiffly in a high-backed chair, her lips pursed, her eyes darting nervously toward the door as if expecting Harry to burst through it at any moment. But Harry was thousands of miles away. Instead, it was William who arrived first, his expression hard and unreadable as he strode into the room. "Father," William said curtly, inclining his head. "William," Charles replied, his voice tired. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." The decision to summon a family meeting had not been easy. For weeks, the monarchy had been battered by Harry and Meghan's relentless counterattacks. The emotional video statements, the carefully timed leaks, the invocation of Diana's name. The Sussexes had turned public opinion into a battleground, and in America and much of Europe, they were winning. Even within the UK, cracks had begun to appear in the once ironclad support for the crown. "We need a unified strategy," Charles said, his voice low. "This cannot continue. The monarchy's credibility is at stake." "Then you should have listened to me before," William shot back sharply. "I told you from the beginning that stripping the titles would provoke them. Harry doesn't respond well to ultimatums. You should have left it alone." Charles's eyes flashed with irritation. "And what would you have me do? Allow them to keep their privileges while they attack the institution at every turn? Allow them to profit off their royal connections while undermining the very foundation of the monarchy?" William said nothing, his jaw tightening. The door creaked open, and Princess Anne entered, her no-nonsense demeanor bringing a chill to the already tense room.